Good evening and welcome to the Your Life Matters show, your gateway to a world where health, wellness, and the pulse of humanity converge. Get ready to embark on a captivating journey filled with enriching conversations, inspiring stories, and insightful perspectives that will leave you feeling empowered and enlightened. Sit back and enjoy an entertaining and educational experience that celebrates the essence of health and well-being. Because in this space, your health matters, your wellness matters, and your life matters. Our hosts are Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis.
Welcome to the Your Life Matters Show podcast. We ask that you please note that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, and any actions taken based on the information presented are at your own risk. We are so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and join us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts, Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis. Let's watch what this evening's podcast is all about.
On this evening's podcast, we're going to dive into the stories, science, and real-life experiences that shape our mental and emotional well-being. We are talking about paranormal phenomena. Paranormal phenomena refers to experiences and events that are considered to be outside the realm of scientific explanation and often attributed to supernatural or mysterious forces. These phenomena are often described as unexplained and mysterious, and their existence is the subject of ongoing debate and research. Here are some examples of paranormal phenomena. Extrasensory perception, or ESP, refers to the ability to perceive information beyond the scope of the five senses, such as telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. Telekinesis is the supposed ability to move or manipulate objects with one's mind without physical contact. Hauntings involve the belief that a place is inhabited by spirits or ghosts, often causing unexplained noises, lights, or other disturbances. Near-death experiences are the experiences reported by individuals who have been clinically dead and then revived, often involving visions, out-of-body sensations, and a sense of peace. Alien abduction is the belief that humans are abducted by extraterrestrial beings, often for observation or experimentation. Devil's footprints refers to a historical event where unusual footprints appeared in the snow, with a supernatural explanation among some. And, electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, are sounds or voices heard on audio recordings that are attributed to paranormal entities. The study of paranormal phenomena is often associated with parapsychology, a field that attempts to investigate these phenomena scientifically. However, the scientific community generally does not accept parapsychology as a legitimate field of research. So, have you ever felt a sudden chill, heard a voice when no one was there, or just known something was with you in the room? You're not alone. According to a 2023 YouGov poll, nearly 42% of Americans say they believe in ghosts, and 1 in 5 say they've actually seen or felt a spirit. But tonight we will delve into the deeper question. Does belief in the paranormal impact your mental health, for better or worse? If you've had a paranormal experience that left you feeling scared, confused, or isolated, know this. You are not alone, and there are ways to talk about it safely, with professionals who respect both your mind and your story. Are ghost sightings real, or rooted in trauma? Can belief in spirits offer comfort or cause harm? What does science say about psychic phenomena and mental well-being? And what happens when the unexplained meets the unhealed? Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or just curious, this episode offers an open-minded, respectful look at where psychology and the supernatural collide. So let's get started.
Well, howdy, and welcome to the Your Life Matters Show podcast, where we dive into the stories, science, and real-life experiences that shape our mental and emotional well-being. Now, today we're about to step into the unknown. Our episode this evening is titled Ghosts, Spirits, and Sanity. Can belief in the paranormal affect your mind? And there'll be no comment by anybody on this one. So anyway, I'm Steve Hodgson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and licensed psychotherapist, Dr. Eric L. Davis. Dr. Davis, this is going to be probably a little bit of an interesting topic for a lot of people today.
I think so. I'm excited about it.
I know, for those that, are listening to us last week after we, finished recording, we started talking for about, usually like 10, 15 minutes, but this went on for about an hour. And because we talked about pareidolia in the last episode, we started talking about the paranormal and pareidolia, which we'll see some incidents of later on. And we said, hey, you know what? Let's just go right do this show now. Okay, so you're in for a good show this evening. So we're going to dive right into the topic because we have a long show for you tonight. Now, I know this topic stirs up strong opinions, endless questions, and maybe even a few goosebumps by the time the show is over. I usually do some podcast. How many people believe in ghosts? Raise your hand. But the problem is, we can't see you online. So if you want to comment in the comment box that, you believe in the paranormal, it'd be interesting to see how many of you actually do. So the question comes up, do ghosts and spirits really exist? And more importantly, how do they affect our beliefs in the paranormal? And how does that affect our mental health? Okay, because that's partially what the show is about here today. Now, we're going to approach this from two fascinating perspectives. We have an experienced paranormal investigator who has seen things he can't explain. And of course, we have our very own psychotherapist, Dr. Eric L. Davis, who will help us navigate the psychological side of belief, fear, and unexplained experiences. So whether or not you're a true believer, a hardcore skeptic, or someone caught in the middle, we invite you to listen with an open mind tonight as we explore what happens at the intersection of supernatural encounters and psychological science. Gosh, that's such a great line. So let me get right into it. Okay, let's start with the word paranormal. Okay, the dictionary, remember that book that people used to have, defines the word paranormal as not scientifically explainable. And the word goes back to 1905, which is the first time the word was used. Now, Wikipedia describes paranormal activity as paranormal events, which are purported phenomena described in popular culture, folk, and other non-scientific bodies of knowledge, whose existence within these contexts is described as being beyond the scope of normal scientific extrasensory perception, which is ESP. For example, like telepathy and stuff. Spiritualism and the pseudoscience of ghost hunting, cryptozoology, which is interesting, and UFOlogy. There's enough TV shows about that on TV now, too. So a poll in August of 24 conducted by the Civil Science showed that 2,000 of the 2,036 respondents, 41% of the people said they believe in ghosts or spirits. 30% believe aliens have visited the Earth. 27% believe in demons. 18% believe in witches, magic, as well as psychics and mind reading. 16% believe in Bigfoot. 16% also believe in astrology and card reading. I don't know where I stand in probably the high numbers on a lot of those topics. Okay. So from your perspective, Dr. Davis, what draws people to believe in the paranormal? Is it fear, hope, trauma, or something? What is it?
I think it's really it has to do with comfort or a sense of control, or continuity of a reality where our brain is programmed to try and make sense of everything that we see. If you had asked me years ago, do spirits exist? I'm not sure what I would have said, but if you ask me today, I think they do. And so I really think that it really is just about making things make sense in our head. So from a psychological standpoint, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but if I go somewhere absolutely expecting that something is going to happen, if I'm expecting that, maybe it could happen, or maybe my brain might think that something that happened was in fact something paranormal when it wasn't, you know. So I think that's really where it comes from.
Most people have to go in, paranormal investigators especially have to go in like a scientist of not believing, being that complete skeptic. Because I was watching um, Jason Hawes, who is from Ghost Hunters,
Uh-huh.
okay, and Ghost Hunters International. And he's on his own now. And he was talking on his show or podcast that he has. And he was talking about how even going into these big places like Waverly Hills and all of that, you're still going in as, you know, I don't believe it. Okay, you say this happens, this happens, this happens. I need to see it with my own eyes. Otherwise, I can't say it's paranormal, what's happening here. And, that we all need to keep that in mind because someone is like myself or even Dr. Davis is convinced that there's something paranormal. If you've never seen it before, you're not going to be
Yeah.
convinced about it. We even had investigators that were like that, that had never seen anything and never felt anything. And it took them to like the fourth or fifth time they were there, and all of a sudden something happened to them. We never heard that word again from them because they know what they had just seen. They were there, they experienced it firsthand. So, are there any psychological benefits to believing in ghosts, spirits, psychic abilities, Bigfoot?
Absolutely. I mean, if when we lose someone, if we believe that we can still remain connected to them, obviously that's going to help us to process grief. Um, Let me look at my notes here. We can also reduce existential anxiety, giving life and death a more perceived meaning, or even promoting resilience during emotional upheaval by creating a belief that there is more than what's seen. So when you think about that, I mean, one of the, and I'm not necessarily trying to compare the two, but if you look at, spiritual beliefs, I mean, those are things that are beyond explanation. So the comfort that someone could even have from, spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, it very much the same type of, it meets that same need biologically in us.
See, and you'll see so many people with the paranormal is concerned. First off, when you were saying that, I was thinking of psychic mediums who
Mhm.
connect with loved ones that have passed and stuff. And again, you can watch on TV and you can say, "Hey, come on, that's phony. They're not really touching on anything." But have a reading by one of these people. I've been read by Teresa Caputo, okay, at one of her events. Um, I even Kim Russo, the happy medium, okay. Kim, I happened got to know after, a number of years working events and stuff with her. Her and her husband became really good friends for a while.
Yeah.
But when they can sit and they can tell you specific things that where you hear people say, "Oh, they're just like jumping around the different, topics."
Mhm.
And she, like, I remember Kim Russo turning to me, just she was talking to my grandmother, and my grandmother said to her that he keeps Kit Kat bars, little Kit Kat bars in his drawer, his nightstand in the drawer there. That's not something that you just,
Yeah.
arbitrarily just say to somebody. There is a little something that's validity behind that. And, I know at that point, the moment she said that, I completely was like, wow, okay, I'm communicating with my grandmother here. Okay. And she brought
Yeah.
up so many things that there's no way of Kim Russo of knowing. She hadn't met us yet at that point. And that, yeah, I can see how people fall for that, but I hope people don't fall for the phony charlatans that are
Yeah.
out there too, okay? Because for the same reasons you just said there, so many people out there that are phonies. Heck, go on Facebook and look at the number of people that say they're psychic mediums and stuff like that. Never heard of these people and you never will again. Okay, so you have to really be careful of that. And how many people with demons think that the paranormal is demons? Everything is a demon, and one of those people, I don't believe that. there have been some evil things, but not everything is evil. So, can strong paranormal beliefs ever be a sign of a deeper mental health issue? And
Absolutely.
I
I mean,
say this not paranormal investigators,
I,
but
yeah. So yes. So in some instances, extremely intense paranormal beliefs may signal an underlying issue. So if you're looking at things like if there's, if it's causing functional impairment, or is it based in, like, is the individual resistant to any rational or reality based dialogue? So I think it's just I think it's a matter of if it's debilitating or not. There are a lot of individuals that, I mean, obviously you've done paranormal investigating. There are lots of people that do that, and it's not really an issue. Like there's not an issue that arises. But if a person is consistently seeing things or hearing voices, I always say err on the side of caution. Definitely at least check into it, see if maybe there's something else going on.
as long as the voices aren't telling you to go out and kill somebody or do
Yeah.
something really bad, okay, it could still be evil, but I doubt it, very
Yeah.
much. That would be a sign. So, how do they tell the difference between whether or not something is really going on or something is going on in the head?
I mean, that's where it gets difficult because, I always ask students or clients, who runs faster? A person who's being chased or a person who thinks they're being chased? Our reality is relative to each person. So, man, that's a tough question, but I think that if there's any uncertainty at all, any uncertainty whatsoever, like, man, I don't know if what's going on is healthy or if there's something, I would always seek, a mental health professional, at least go talk to somebody just to make sure.
See, we've had, over my years of investigating, there were at least 10 times I know where people would say, I actually thought about going to seek help.
Mhm.
Okay, because I'm hearing
Yeah.
these voices and these things are going on, and my husband's looking at me like there's something wrong with me. And, and I'd sit there, well, I'm thinking to myself, they could be. And then again, maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what we can find. Okay, because maybe I can find, you know, scientific evidence that I can show you so that your husband doesn't think you're crazy and you're not crazy. But if I can't and nothing's happening in the house, then you may need to, wouldn't hurt, go talk to
Yeah,
somebody,
definitely.
and find out. So in your practice, let's say, and I hear this all the time from people. I grew up in a haunted house. Okay, so if a client told you they lived in a haunted house, what would be your first instinct as a therapist?
Honestly, I'd explore that further. I would ask legitimate questions such as, um, what tells you it's haunted? Tell me about that. What sort of experiences have you had there? I really would talk about it more just to try and understand, the individual's subjective experience, because who am I to, I mean, that's the thing in therapy. We're grounded in reality, but at the same time, we have to pay special attention to the individual's subjective reality, and so sometimes sometimes it's a little bit of detective work and things, but that's part of what I love about being a therapist. It's
So
always
would you
different.
tell them then if you have run a couple of sessions with them and find out that they're really pretty, normal?
Yeah.
Okay, what would you recommend them going to see?
I mean, I would ask them if that, I would ask the client, I would work with the client to help determine what they think the next best step would be. And I mean, obviously I wouldn't like poo-poo doing a paranormal investigation or any of those things. I mean, I think that, a good therapist will always, within reason, let me say it that way, allow the client to do as they choose, and really just to help them. It's not even so much as helping them giving them a plan so much as helping them to create a healthy plan for moving forward.
I have to laugh. We did a show on sleep the other day,
Mhm.
a week or two ago, and Dr. Michael Presley, who will be joining us, at some point, talk about sleep and stuff from a medical side. My first visit there with him, my wife Jen and myself were there, and during the exam, he was questioning about, I've ever had any like bad nightmares or anything like that. So I started telling him the story that I talk about in my books. Where during the night the thing came out of my dream, basically lifted me up against the wall and dropped me. And I see these blank staring eyes in front of me, looking
Wow.
back at me. Okay. And he's like, really? So we started talking about, that we've been paranormal investigators. And I mentioned I've been investigating for over 40 something years at that point. And he goes, okay. Um, you know, fine, that's okay. He's taking all these little notes and stuff. So in his report, which I actually had to go back because I wanted to quote what he wrote down in his
Yeah.
report. Okay, and he says, similarly, I'm not sure what to make of the reported episode of falling from the ceiling wall in conjunction with an evil entity apparition dream, as Steve is definitive that he woke to find himself floating above the ground before being dropped to the floor, and reports another episode involving this entity that occurred while he was wide awake in the middle of the day when the entity reportedly tripped him. And I have to laugh, okay, because it was actually funny to see that, okay, wait a minute, his sleep study was going to be based on the fact that maybe I need to seek mental help somewhere along the line here,
Yeah.
because we know these things happened. We were there for both of them, okay, and especially the one where I was awake. There's no question about what was going on with that, and I might even go into some of those later on. But gosh, if he only knew. Now today he laughs at that when I talk to him.
Yeah.
Okay, because he knows I've been in this long enough now, and he knows me long enough, and knows that I'm not crazy. Well, maybe he doesn't know me well enough, but he knows that I'm not that
He
crazy.
knows you
And
well enough that he doesn't think you're crazy, which says he
yes,
doesn't. No, I'm
doesn't know
teasing you.
me enough.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'm just glad my wife is out doing clinicals right now, because some of her questions about whether I'm sane or not would be up there. So, are there mental conditions, health conditions, that make people more likely to believe in paranormal phenomena?
Yeah. So there are conditions that increase susceptibility or openness, to paranormal interpretations. Some of those, are schizophrenia or schizophrenia spectrum disorders. So like schizoaffective disorder, etc. Post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative disorders. Bipolar disorder during manic or mixed episodes. So it's pretty common. There are some types of bipolar disorder where individuals will report, hearing voices or having auditory or visual hallucinations. Sometimes grief-related depression. The reality is that obviously not all beliefs are signs of mental illness. You know, um, what's most important is the context, of that, and why a person believes what they believe, or why what they feel like they're seeing or hearing is a problem or isn't. But
So
there
there's
definitely
grief.
are.
There's,
Oh, go
what
ahead.
what about someone who just lost a love I'm gonna use an example of someone I know, and I don't want to say who they are. Okay, it's an older person, and they keep telling, people around them in the family that they're hearing from their wife who passed away. Okay, and in their head, they still believe that, they're there. Now, of course, I'm the wrong person to tell a story like that to, because I actually will believe in what they're telling us.
Yeah.
And I apologize to those folks that are hearing my dogs going off in the background here. But, you know, can grief and stuff cause people to start hearing voices just out of nowhere?
I mean, it could, it's that's one of those things where I'm sure, I have no doubt in my mind that something along those lines has happened, you know, and it could be a matter of, just coping with grief. For example, I work with a lot of clients that are, they've lost children, parents, best friend, pet, and they're extremely depressed. And then a lot of times, I'll always talk with them about, well, what do you believe? And if whatever they believe is fine. If they're open to, metaphysical concepts or paranormal type concepts, I've had some clients that report just simply sitting in a room by themselves and talking to that person, has given them a lot of relief. And sometimes they'll even report, like I was talking about something. And it's like I just had this feeling, So I kind of approach those things in the beginning, as okay, what does this mean to the individual? What are they gleaning from it? And then from there, is it a problem or not? A lot of times those things, if they're not a problem, can't necessarily hurt.
I've always heard, a closure on a situation in someone's past to sit
Mhm.
down as if you're holding a conversation with them,
Yeah,
and get that closure that you need,
yeah,
get to say what you want to say. And, I'm sorry, I'm one of those people who believe they can hear you, okay,
mhm,
and what you say, but, for their sake, I get it. And,
yeah,
and I guess that's sort of the same way, sit, talk. My wife will tell you, working as, a nurse now, how many nurses in hospice will tell you that they were non-believers until they started working hospice. Because all of a sudden, they walk into a room and, you know, guy's talking to somebody. They're like, who you talking to? He's like,
yeah,
talking to my brother over there. And they're looking like, no, there's no my brother over there. But, and he'll start pointing out family members that are there with them in the room. And I
yeah,
mean, we've been inside of a room when someone passed away in a hospice. And let me tell you, there were a couple of people that were there inside that room, and I couldn't see them. But heck, if I couldn't feel their presence sitting like right next to me,
yeah.
in some of those rooms, and it's amazing. So, do patients use that? I think you may have even answered it a little bit. So, do patients use that as a coping mechanism to say
Yeah, they
that
can.
they hear people talking to them?
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely be a coping mechanism. Um, it's about let me say it this way, closure. Even paranormal things aside, let's say that, which I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. I know you are too, but let's say that paranormal aside doesn't exist and there's nothing paranormal. Even just in the context of, regular things, if it offers closure to them, that is important. So, a lot of times I've, like I said, if it's helping them, even if they're just talking in the dark or whatever it is, some clients will write letters. They'll just basically write to the person like it's just an ongoing, never-ending letter. And I've seen any number of those things, help some. But I've also seen individuals that, when we kind of explored things, it was no, I'm hearing something that's telling me this, and it's like, no, okay, then we probably
Right.
need to, need to go from here. And that, hopefully I answered your question somewhere, but yes.
Yeah, because there's so many people. I think just listening to what you've been saying, it's more like a wound, and to heal the wound, you usually put some some peroxide or something on. You put a
Yeah.
Band-Aid over it, and you wait for the wound to heal, and that's really for a lot of people that's healing the wound.
Yeah.
That closure is healing that wound that's open there, so people can go on with their
One of
lives
the
after that.
one of the misconceptions, and I just want to share this real quick because I think it's important. Something that comes up about grief and loss all the time for me, is people will say, um, you know, I, I feel like I'm, processing my grief and things have been going a lot better, and then, man, yesterday, just all of a sudden, I'm grieving so heavily, and I'm, so overwhelmed with grief. And the thing is, when we look at grief, the reality is, I believe that healed grief, or as healed as grief can be, is we're simply melancholy. And I say that because, my biological dad passed away many, many years ago. I mean, I was 23 years old. I'm getting ready to turn 48 now, so it's been a long, long time. But the thing is, it's like in the beginning, after he passed away, I couldn't even talk about him without crying. And then as time goes on, it's like, well, then I could talk about him for a while without crying. Then it's, now I can talk about him without crying. But every now and then, it's just, I wake up and I'm just overwhelmed with grief. And that does not mean that I'm doing something wrong. That is what, healed or in the process of healing grief looks like. And I think that's the best we can hope for, which is feeling melancholy, where I'm always going to be sad that I lost my dad, but I can laugh today about funny things that happened, or, so I just wanted to put that out there. If anybody's watching and you're beating yourself up that, oh, I'm grieving wrong, you're not grieving wrong. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. It's
Correct.
just grief comes in waves. You just never know what a day's going to hold when it comes to grief.
There was by the way, if you're hearing all this noise in the background, since we started recording here, we have a humongous lightning and thunderstorm going on right
Oh,
outside my house here. So
I
if you
haven't heard
hear
anything
boom,
so far.
okay, well that's good. Okay, because once I almost jumped from from sitting here listening to you, and all of a sudden I didn't even see the lightning go up, and
Wow.
it was like real close. But it's one of those things where I was trying to remember what I was about to say before that. You start to remember certain things about people just out of nowhere. We can say
Yeah.
from a mental side or a spiritual side that that person is with us, at that moment and stuff. But I remember what I was going to say. There was a line in a movie that I heard once and I could never find it again. They asked somebody, "Why weren't you crying again?"
Mhm.
And the person said, "I can't repeat an emotion." Okay,
Yeah.
and I think myself, it was great because that explains so much. I think for me that movie line is perfect because that's been the story of my life. I know even like when my mom had passed away, um, I got upset when I first heard, that she had passed and stuff. But like at the funeral, people are crying and stuff, and they're like, and I think my brother is a little bit the same way. They're like, why are the two of you so stoic? Okay,
Yeah.
during the thing, it's not like we don't care, and we had no feelings and stuff, but we already went down that route of crying.
Yeah.
I guess my dad had taught us to be more like men, stand up, the old time people, that's the way
Yeah.
they were, and so I guess I sort of picked that up a little bit along the way too, which probably, if you can handle it healthy, is probably a decent way you can deal with that. But you don't want to
Yeah.
bottle up emotions
Right.
inside as well as like I'm telling you, like you need to hear me say that. But I mean, really,
I'm still a human being.
yeah. But I mean, we have to, still express our emotions.
Yes.
And it's funny because we talk about paranormal and incidences we won't even talk about just took place. But at she got buried at a an army cemetery where my dad was going to have a thing, on the opposite side, the grave on the opposite side of her. And they do the ceremony, with the priest bless the casket right there. Not
Yeah.
at the site, but there's like a little setting area as soon as you come in. And, they went through the thing and it was a hot day. That's all I can tell you. I remember it being hot and it was in April. It was like, April like 20th to 21st, somewhere in there. Um, no breeze, no nothing. It was hot. And all of a sudden, this breeze came through. One breeze just came right through. And we were both, my brother and I, almost choked up with emotion. Because, we can say what we want, believe what we want. Even my wife said, that's your mom, coming through and saying goodbye, that she was there. And yeah, okay, that I fought it for a second. That was almost my tear moment. Again, coming back through. But yeah, I mean, you know, that line has been for me so good because so many times I've had to explain that to people that I'm not heartless and stuff. Yeah, I feel stuff, but I've already done that. Yeah, I've already been upset and stuff like that. I'm not going to continue for myself. I'm not going to continue to cry. If it makes you feel better, and that's what you have to do, show that emotion. I don't have zero problems with that. And I'm sure you'll agree, we have to deal with grief as we can, but as long as we deal with it, okay,
Yeah,
there's different ways to deal with it. As long as we deal with
definitely.
it, that's the main thing. And like you said, even if it's talking to the person that is past and stuff, however you're going to grieve and put closure onto that, and you never really close it, like you said, you still think about your dad and stuff like that.
Oh, every day.
Yeah, I still think about my mom, and for all I know, the storm things that we were just dealing with, okay, could have been her way of. Yeah, that's my mom's sense of humor. Trust me, that would be my mom's sense of humor to do that. Maybe she got together with your dad, and they both came and just said,
I hope so.
we'll teach them a lesson." Okay. So, let me ask you, is there a line between spiritual experience and psychological distress? And that's from a clinical perspective.
Yeah, I think so. What that makes me think of is um, there's an old, and I don't know if this is true or not. So maybe if somebody's watching this and and you can point me in the direction of the answer. I remember hearing years ago that in the 12 steps, in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that in the beginning, step 12 said, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, blah, blah, blah. And that they ended up changing that years later to read a spiritual awakening. And so it's kind of like, well, what's the difference then? Well, what's a spiritual experience versus a spiritual awakening? And basically what they were saying, or what I was told, was that a spiritual experience, that just, it just happens. It just happens. It can happen overnight. It can be, a person is one way and they have this spiritual, like a big epiphany or a big,
Right.
I have those things happen all the time where it's just, I'll learn about something. And it's like all these things, it changes how I see everything. But a spiritual awakening is something that can happen over time or even in small increments. So I think that, the spiritual experiences a lot of times can be extremely enriching. Basically, so the reason that they changed that, the old story goes, is because people would get to, like the early founders of AA, et cetera, or the early members would get to step 12 and it would say, having had a spiritual experience. And they're like, well, I haven't had a spiritual experience. I haven't had anything happen. And so it was like, well, then I must have done the steps wrong getting to this point.
Right.
So I don't know if that's true. I heard that, through the recovery grapevine at one point. But I think that, it depends on what you do with that experience. If it's something that gives you some peace of mind, like a lot of times there'll be times when I'm thinking about my dad a lot, and I'll just kind of think, like, man, well, if you're here, like, let me know, and then something will happen, a picture of him falls down or something, is that because he communicated with me? Who am I to say? But it sure feels good to think that it is, so why change that?
In life, there's so many coincidences, but There are certain things that just are not coincidence. You
Mhm.
know, I'm sorry, I just don't believe. One thing, and I know you'll probably ask me the question a little bit here, but my uncle when I was young, he was 35 years old and picture of health, just killed over and died in his house in Long Island, and I mean just killed over and that was it, went like that. And in Manhattan, my grandmother, Italian grandmother, old Italian grandmother, she had all these pictures on her bureau, like
Yeah.
4 rows of pictures. And she was sitting in her living room and she heard a smash. And she was like, what was that? And she went back. His picture was in the 4th row.
Uh-huh.
None of the other pictures had moved. His
Man.
picture had smashed to the ground and the glass in front of, the picture broke. And she knew something was wrong. She picked up the phone and she called in there, and the paramedics had just pronounced him dead.
Mm.
Okay, coincidence?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, I don't think there's very many of us that can tell you whether they know or not.
Yeah.
It's just go with the. I don't know. I'd be going into personal stuff, and that's not what the show is supposed to be about. So, well, let me ask you the 2 last questions. Okay, do you think the mind is powerful enough to just make us believe that we're seeing things?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have no doubt about it. Sometimes that is the case where, like we talked recently about like, whatever, pareidolia and,
Hmm.
different things like that, where our brain is very powerful, and like I said, that's our perception is everything. Who runs faster? Someone who's actually being chased or someone who just thinks they are. Like, there is no difference, because
Hmm.
their reality is they're being chased. So absolutely. I mean, I think that there would be cases where the mind is, more than powerful enough to just make us see or believe something. The cool thing is the mind is also powerful enough to argue with things that we see or hear or to question beliefs, etc. So hopefully that answered it somewhere. I know that's
No,
not
it
exactly
does.
a
Yeah,
solid answer.
our mind. We haven't even tapped a fraction of what our brain is probably
Mhm.
capable of. I mean, what is do you know offhand the percentage of the brain that we use?
I'm wanting to say like 30 or so. I think it's less than half.
Yeah, it's less than, yeah, right. So God knows what the other, let's even say half of our brain is capable of. And, I mean, when psychics and stuff and mediums and stuff, we don't know, they could be using that other part of the brain that we're not. Okay, I think we've all had that ability. Some of us just shut it off. Um, there's always a story of, when you're a kid, and your imaginary friend. So your parents will tell you, would you stop,
Yeah.
playing with that? Come on, grow up. Okay, there's nobody there. It's up. Well, you're actually turning the child off to that stuff, and where some parents don't tell their children to stop, and that might be part of why they're more open to
Mhm.
things that are going on and stuff, and things don't become unusual.
Yeah.
Okay, at a certain point after that. Now, I'm going to ask you one last question.
All
Okay,
right.
and I think we know the answer from like watching here. Do you believe in ghosts, and
Yeah.
why?
I believe in so yes, I do. And I believe in ghosts strictly based on personal experiences that I've had. Um, two in particular. Um, and do you want me to talk about it or
Yeah, yeah,
just leave it at
please.
that?
We're at that point.
So,
Yep.
so Erin, my wife, when we lived on the south side of Indianapolis, there was so I lived in a small house for many, many years, and I had seen like a figure there before. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't necessarily scared of it or anything, but I'd seen something. and it didn't bother me. I didn't get freaked out. There was no negativity about it at the first time I kind of saw it. So one night we're laying in bed and I wake up to her basically pointing and, like pointing in front of or to the foot of the bed and going, getting ready to, scream. And I kind of, it's okay. Just calm down. It's okay. And she kind of calmed down and I was like, just go back to sleep. And so the next day, I got home and then she came home from work and we were just, talking about the day. And I said, hey, can I ask you something? Last night, did you see something at the foot of the bed? And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, did you happen to see like a black figure that basically looked like kind of like a black stick figure? Almost like you could almost transparent sort of, but like you could see it, but it wasn't solid. Standing there and she was like, she just turned white as a sheet. She was like, how did you know that? And I was like, because I saw it too. And, at that point, it's like, okay, like if I ever questioned before, because the chances of us, just
Mass
seeing
hallucinations, yeah.
yeah, I don't, the thing for me is I had seen it before. I saw it, haven't seen it since then, don't want to, but yeah, so I do, I believe that I believe in the paranormal.
One of the rules that we always had in our paranormal group was you did not investigate by yourself.
Mhm.
And it wasn't a matter of fear, sending somebody off by
Yeah.
themselves. But if I saw something, you wanted to have someone else who saw and experienced the same
Verify.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's anybody can say they saw anything. But
Yeah.
when two people tell you that they saw and they can explain exactly the same thing of what they saw, there's
Yeah.
validity behind that. And we were always very, very careful of that. That wasn't one person in a room. There was more than one person in the room at all times because that's
Yeah.
so, so important. Well, folks, at this point of the show, we're going to do something we've only done once before. Okay. And that was during our vacation travel episode. If you remember back, that's when Dr. Davis interviewed me. And I sat and answered question on behalf of the travel agent I did research for. Except tonight, I pulled out professional paranormal investigations. Now, you may be asking, what's professional paranormal investigations? That's the name of my paranormal group that we had for probably about 12 to 13 years. Did probably close to 1,000 investigations together. There were times we were investigating almost like twice a weekend, Friday and
Wow.
Saturday nights. It got really, really, especially after COVID, because people were in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
See, during the summer right now, you're outside
Yep.
most of the
Yeah.
time, except in storms like tonight. But you're outside most of the time, and you don't hear the stuff in your house, or you sleep with your windows open. You're not going to sleep with your windows open during the winter, but
Yeah.
during the summer, you have your windows open, so they don't hear it, or if they hear something, they think it's outside. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think really it's going to be interesting. I think we're going to sit back, and I know I'm going to have a little bit of fun because it's nothing I have to research. It's all stuff in my head, um, and you're going to get to see some stuff and hear some stuff. Dr. Davis hasn't even heard 90% of this. I did show him some stuff we talked earlier today. Um, from investigations. Now, the reason I've never put a lot of this stuff out there is because this belonged to homeowners. A lot of this stuff happened in people's homes. Okay. And even when I talked about them when the group did presentations, if it was something that took place in, let's say, Westport, for instance,
Mhm.
I would say, there was this home in Indianapolis that we did, and changed the
Yeah.
whole thing. If we pick something up at a school, now it happened at a gym, at a big, exercise place. I would say, I won't say the name, it's a chain. It's so this way nobody wants really what went on in their house to be talked about.
Yeah.
But I can't, it is our evidence, and I will play the stuff that you heard there and stuff. And all I'm going to do is, just so I'm a little different, I'll put on my professional paranormal investigation hat. Well, if you can see it there. There we go. Okay. Exploring the unknown on. And feels weird wearing a hat when you have no hair.
I agree.
I'm not used to that. Okay. So I'm now a guest.
We truly hope you enjoyed part 1 of this riveting discussion on mental health and the paranormal. Please tune in next week for part 2, where you will see and hear actual evidence from home investigations caught and presented on the internet for the first time by Steve Hodgson and the paranormal group Professional Paranormal Investigations. If you ever wondered, is the paranormal real, you will not want to miss part 2, next Thursday, June 19th, 2025 at 8 p.m. right here on YouTube. Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for another great episode with your host Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are valuable and important. Take time to cherish yourself and those around you. Never forget, your life matters.